Now we can.
No, we can't see you. No.
I can see you. I can see you, Stefania. Hello.
Hi, Anna.
Perfect.
Hi.
Good.
We can
Good
see
afternoon.
you. And I think that we can also hear you clearly. So normally everything's fine on our side.
Okay, so now you can see and hear me.
Exactly. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event, which is co-organized by the Government of Sweden, the Global Education Monitoring, or GEM report, and UNESCO's education sector. Today's webinar is available both in English and Spanish, and you can change the language by clicking on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen. My name is Sophie Sandberg. I'm the founder of Chalk Back, which is a global youth-led movement against gender-based violence. I'm also a member of Transform Education, which is hosted by the UN Girls Education Initiative. It's a network of youth-led organizations. And I'm very excited to moderate this event today. During this webinar, we'll be looking at the latest trends and analysis on comprehensive sexuality education. We'll be sharing new tools and resources to assist education policymakers and strengthen policy and programs needed to support young people to develop the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes they need to make conscious, healthy, and respectful choices about their relationships, bodies, safety, and reproduction. The evidence is clear. Comprehensive sexuality education must be a global, regional, and national priority. Yet despite a commitment made in the Global Education Goal SDG 4 to ensure good quality education that is based in life skills, much remains to be done. Many countries report having some kind of regulatory framework related to sexuality education. However, policies specific to sexuality education are few, and these frameworks are not always reflected in classroom implementation. Today's events will discuss the latest evidence on how sexuality education is designed and delivered in different education systems based on 50 new country profiles published by the GEM report on its peer website that is launching today. Over the course of these 75 minutes, we will learn from education policymakers, CSE experts, and practitioners about different approaches to sexuality education based on the trends emerging from the new peer profiles. Speakers will share their insights on the process of ensuring quality and sustainable enabling environments and offer lessons on how to translate policy commitments into concrete action. So first, let's hear from Stefania Giannini, Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, with a few welcoming remarks on behalf of the organizers.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you very much, Sophie. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, dear colleagues, dear guests connected with us. It's a great pleasure, a great honor on behalf of UNESCO and the Global Education Monitoring Report to be here, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you today to today's webinar. We all know, as our moderator just mentioned, that comprehensive sexuality education is central in education, is central to health and well-being of children and youth, and it's a strong component in SDG 4 roadmap. I wish to start with some good news based on UNESCO 2021 report on comprehensive sexuality education. We can say that there has been a strong progress in some countries, including important innovations in curriculum design and teacher training, which are two main dimensions we have to work. Most countries report having some kind of legal, regulatory policy framework that supports actually sexuality education, and it should be. But it doesn't always mean that it's comprehensive or that children and young people are actually receiving. And now, moving from the good to the a little bit bad news, we have teachers are often not prepared. Students are not learning the range knowledge and skills they actually need. And most importantly, misinformation is hampering efforts to deliver comprehensive sexuality education. Well, all in all, as a result, we can say that millions of children and young people say that they have very little information on how to manage their transition to adulthood. Well, today we are launching a new set of 50 country profiles from the GEM reports Profiles Enhancing Education Reviews, or PEER, and they set out the latest evidence on how sexuality education is designed and delivered in education systems around the world. For countries embarking on their own process of designing such an important policy and eager to learn from others in their own region, they are a very important tool. And the conveners of our webinar today, the government of Sweden, let me take the opportunity, by the way, to really thank Sweden as a great partner. And I see Madam Ambassador Anna Brand connected, and she will for sure bring her vision. Sweden, UNESCO, and the GEM report are committed to supporting governments to ensure learners have access to age-appropriate national sexuality education programs at school. This is the common objective we have, and we all of us hope that the tools we present today will support countries to meet their commitments and learn from one another. I'm looking forward to hear more about your experience during our discussion, and I'm sure that this webinar is a very important further step in the process of making sexuality, comprehensive sexuality education part of the policy to take in order to achieve SDG 4 in the coming years. Thank you very much. Sophie, over to you.
Thank you very much, Stefania. Thank you for sharing the good and bad news, and for all of your thoughts. So the next we have, as the first country to introduce sexuality education in schools in 1955, Sweden has a long history of prioritizing sexual and reproductive health and rights as part of its health, gender, human rights, and sustainable development work. And we're delighted to have with us today Ms. Anna Brandt, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Sweden to the OECD and UNESCO, to hear more about why and how Sweden is championing CSE within national and international policy. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Sophie. ADG Giannini and everybody listening in, honorable ministers, excellencies, colleagues. I'm really delighted and honored to open and co-host this event on the journey towards comprehensive sexuality education. It is a journey that's profoundly important when it comes to fostering inclusive societies. Comprehensive sexuality education, leaving children and young people healthy and educated, is a human right that allows them to reach their full potential and take informed decisions. In turn, this allows countries to achieve better social and economic development. As will be discussed over the course of today's webinar, it's indeed quite striking that we, across regions and generations all over the world, now have a widespread understanding of the importance of investing in health through education. We're moving the focus from discussing why comprehensive sexuality education is important to how we can enhance its design and deliverance in education systems. Progress has been made in many countries all over the world, as ADG Stefania Giannini just said, not least in recognizing the importance of comprehensive sexuality education in education plans and in visionary strategies. And as we know, every long journey begins with a first step. So that is a good first step. But as the AGG said, everything isn't good. There are also challenges and more remains to be done. There are still huge gaps which require, firstly, that we understand them, and then secondly, that we fill them. Implementation and monitoring are two crucial pillars that need strengthening. As our moderator just said, Sweden was the first country in the world to integrate comprehensive sexuality education in our curricula, and it was nearly 70 years ago that we did this. And since then, we've had gradual developments of our policy. And today, Sweden has a low rate of early and unintended pregnancies, as well as an increased awareness of sexually transmitted infections. And we do relate this to our comprehensive sexuality education. We made some crucial advancements just in recent years. In 2021, comprehensive sexuality education was made compulsory in all teacher trainings. So not only a subject for those teachers aiming to teach the subject, but compulsory for all teachers. And I think this is a really important aspect because we know that the teacher knowledge and the teacher awareness and the teacher tools are sometimes lacking. And from last year, 2020-22, the knowledge area has been renamed. It's now called Sexuality, Consent, and Relationships, thereby emphasizing a holistic approach to what we see as the core components of good quality sexuality education. But as I said, even though we've had a long tradition, we haven't been without challenges. Studies done in my country show that there is still a high level of ignorance from society on sexually transmitted diseases, and that there's a need for more studies that conduct in-depth investigations into a number of issues related to comprehensive sexuality education, such as, for instance, sexual violence, understanding the issue of consent, and health issues like effects of menstruation. Now, since we believe that this has been so important for our own country, we are obviously also integrating comprehensive sexuality education in our international policies, and more specifically into our international development cooperation. And that's why we're so happy to be partnering with UNESCO in this very important field. We've been doing so for quite some time and quite successfully. We also integrated in our bilateral development cooperation, particularly in our country programs with countries. Now, independent of where we as countries find ourselves on the journey towards comprehensive sexuality education, we do share many things in common. We share the challenges facing us in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic that really hit us all. And We know hitting our education sectors, but also having severe effects on our health situations. We share the challenge on how to address misconceptions all over the world. We share our conviction to foster support for sexuality education. And we share a commitment to promoting gender equality and human rights. And by sharing experiences and joining forces, I believe that real progress can be made and that we can achieve positive change. And that's why it's so important to understand different countries' experiences, different country contexts, learn from each other, and to discuss how we can continue to overcome challenges and move forward. So with these words, I want to thank everyone for your kind attention, and thank you for giving me the space to introduce this important topic. And with this, I give the floor back to you, Sophie. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna, for sharing so many really crucial and important reflections. Let's now hear from GEM Report's director, Manos Antoninis, and UNESCO's Chief of Section for Health and Education, Joanna Harriott, who will take us through the key findings from the peer country profiles on comprehensive sexuality education and the Journey Towards Comprehensive Sexuality Education, the Global Status Report. These are both really critical tools to support countries to plan, teach, and monitor CSE programs. Over to you both.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I'm Joanna Harriott, the acting Chief of the Section for Health and Education. Manos?
Please, Joe, go ahead. I'm Manos Antoninis, I'm the Director of the Global Education Monitoring Report. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So thank you so much for those opening remarks. You've really set the scene so well that this is about a topic that's critical to quality education, and it's about a topic that we can learn a lot about by sharing our experiences between countries, and it's been a privilege and a pleasure for us in the section of health and education to collaborate with the GEM report. So I'm going to quickly make sure that I think we're all on the same page and we have a common understanding of what we mean by comprehensive sexuality education, because it can mean many things to different people. Every child will one day have important and life-changing decisions to make about their well-being, about relationships, families, and their life goals. And yet, what we see is that many children grow up not having even the basic knowledge and the skills to make these decisions carefully. We know that children are receiving a huge amount of confusing and conflicting messages from the media and from many different sources, from the internet, from their peers, and from voices in their community. And those are often messages about relationships, about love, about sex, about what does it mean to be a man or a woman in your own society. So by learning about sex and relationships in the classroom, children and young people can understand and make sense of this flood of images and messages as part of their education and preparation for adulthood. And it also means that they can be better protected against a range of really serious health issues. And the data here on this slide, I think, highlights how critical this still is when we see that there are 10 million unintended pregnancies each year among adolescent girls. When we understand that pregnancy and childbirth are a leading cause of death for older adolescent girls. HIV is still very present in many communities around the world. And we're seeing more and more data emerge about the experience of sexual and interpersonal violence and gender-based violence. So having good quality sexuality education is also part of the prevention of these health and social outcomes, which we all agree as part of the SDGs and our common commitment to health and well-being are an important issues to be addressed. So what is comprehensive sexuality education? Through the International Technical Guidance, which was published in 2018, we have a definition which describes this as a curriculum-based process. It's about teaching and learning, but it's also cognitive, emotional, physical, and social aspects of sexuality. And the intention is to equip learners not only with knowledge, but also with the skills and the attitudes and values to empower them. We want to make sure that they can realize their health and well-being and dignity, importantly, to develop respectful relationships, to be able to critically reflect on their own choices and the impacts of those choices, and also to understand their rights. And in this way, it's a core component of equality education. And because it's delivered part of an educational process, it is always age appropriate. The lessons that are being delivered are appropriate to the age and developmental stage of the learners in that room. Next slide, please. There is clear evidence for the benefits of CSE. It contributes to the delayed initiation of sexual intercourse, decreased frequency of sexual relationships and numbers of partners. Overall, it contributes to reduced risk-taking in terms of sexual relationships, which then leads to reduced early pregnancies and HIV. But equally importantly are the positive outcomes of sexuality education, which is to provide these knowledge and skills to develop and sustain healthy relationships now and into the future. For example, to be able to decide if and when to begin a sexual relationship, to be able to understand boundaries and consent between friends, to be able to understand bullying and violence and prevent it. So in that sense, sexuality education is also contributing to the development of life skills and social and emotional learning skills that promote critical thinking, communication, and negotiation. And I think we all recognise that these are increasingly important skills that will take us and the generation of children and young people now into the future of the 21st century, where we're not yet quite clear what kind of jobs, what kinds of societies and communities await them. Next slide, please. Sexuality education is known by many different names in many different countries. And here on the screen, you'll see just some examples of some different names of programs and school curricula that exist in different countries. So whatever a country decides to call its program, whether it's life skills or family health and life education or sexuality education or relationships education in some places, what's really clear is that if it is to be effective, so that means if it's to lead to better gender equality and better health outcomes, it has to meet some common criteria. So it must be grounded in human rights and be scientifically accurate. It's also more effective when it takes a positive approach, so not giving negative messages or viewing human sexuality as shameful. So it has to also be comprehensive in its content. That means about biological questions, as well as about relationships and social issues, such as gender inequality or the role of media in young people's lives. And finally, the evidence shows that it's more effective when questions of gender and power are explored in a critical and transformative way. Last year, we produced a report called The Journey to CSE, where we brought together a range of different data sets to understand how far countries were progressing in their own targets to deliver sexuality education. And it provided a global snapshot of the status around the world. So this helps us to understand the bigger picture and to see what recent developments there are in sexuality education. And our ADG referred to that in her opening remarks. It also allows us to target resources where there are bigger gaps. But at the same time as our analysis, we were always aware that the analysis at the country level, we needed to understand more detail and understand more about what these policies were saying and what information they could offer us to understand the landscape of sexuality education that goes beyond self-reporting by countries on a fairly brief data set about policies. So that's why we decided to join efforts with the Global Education Monitoring Report team to take a more in-depth look at country level policies and the realities on the ground of sexuality education policies. And this is where the peer profiles come in. And at this point, I will hand over to Manos, who will be able to present to you the findings of the peer profile review. Thank you very much.
And I would start by acknowledging first that this is not the first time that we have worked with Joe's team, who has provided the bulk of the inputs from various different strands of work and projects that they have carried out over recent years. The idea behind peer is to put them all together in a comparable platform. And that's the whole idea of peer, as I'm going to show in the video in a minute. But let's not forget, it's the second time we're collaborating, because just a few years ago, we had also a very interesting policy paper summarizing knowledge. But there's no better person who actually explains the logic of peer than Ambassador Brandt, who really puts our attention to the right questions about how important it is for countries to learn from each other. So a quick video here describing what peer tries to do in that sense, not just in comprehensive sexuality education, the new subject, the new chapter, but also on other areas.
The Global Education Monitoring Report has been informing education action since 2002, but it is so much more than just a report. Alongside its multiple publications, the report team has produced online tools as new global public goods in education. One of them, Peer, was launched in 2020 to monitor national education laws and policies on issues key to SDG 4. With comparable country profiles, it is designed to facilitate policy dialogue. The profiles are prepared by the team and are sent for external review to countries via their UNESCO delegations. In some cases, they are also reviewed externally by academics or organizations, such as the Global Campaign for Education. The information is used to map and monitor the status of education policies and provide a baseline from which to assess trends in the future. There are two types of profiles. First, there are those that focus on the theme of the global report and cover all countries. Profiles on inclusion in 2020 showed that laws in a quarter of countries required children with disabilities to be educated in separate settings. Profiles on regulation of non-state education provision in 2021 showed that 27% of countries have made profit-making illegal in primary and secondary education. Future profiles will address technology in education in 2023 and school leadership in 2024. Second, there are profiles that cover fewer countries but focus on other important policy issues. Profiles on equitable financing in education showed that only 1 in 5 countries demonstrated a strong commitment to equity in their budgets. Profiles on climate change communication and education in partnership with the monitoring and evaluation of climate change education projects showed that only 45% of national education sector plans addressed the issue. Profiles are now being developed on comprehensive sexuality education in partnership with UNESCO. Visit the website. Help support the report's Voice for Change.
So this video hopefully explains the concepts. And today we are on the happy occasion to launch the first set of 50 profiles, country profiles on comprehensive sexuality education, which consists of 5 parts: the context, the terminology, laws and policies, governance arrangements, and especially how different ministries collaborate, and monitoring and evaluation arrangements. So 3 are the main questions that you can answer, and the whole purpose of peer is precisely to offer a frame so that countries can look at what their peers are doing, because often we find ourselves in policy dialogue events, but every country presents things from a very different perspective, focusing on different things. But this platform offers the opportunity to policymakers to look at a comparable sets of information. So first is, what are the terms, laws, policies, and strategies are using to refer to sexuality education? How exactly these laws, policies, and strategies relate to implementing sexuality education, and how is sexuality education covered in curricula, learning, and teaching materials? A few facts, but there's a brochure that we have published on this occasion where you can find some of the indicators, because ultimately we collect the information and then we summarize some of the key findings between countries to give a sense of what are global trends. Education, legislation, and policies, as you have heard already, tend to refer to sexuality education, but few countries have comprehensive frameworks in that respect. Of the 50 countries that we have reviewed, only 20% have a law And of course, Argentina, who's going to speak later, is one of those. 39% have a national policy that specifically addresses sexuality education. Legislation and policies promote the integration of comprehensive sexuality education into the formal curriculum, but sexuality education itself is compulsory only in 68% of countries at the primary education level and 76% of countries in secondary education. In general, sexuality education is integrated in different subjects in at least 3 or 4 countries, and mostly tend to cover HIV, AIDS, and other sexually transmitted infection issues. As Joe mentioned earlier, the role of schools in comprehensive sexuality education is really key. They tend to cover issues related primarily to biological aspects, body awareness, puberty, pregnancy, and birth. But 3 or 4 countries, and that's very important in terms of the shift of understanding, cover these issues in the context of human rights. More than 2 in 3 cover issues related to love, marriage, partnership, and family, and as you heard from Sweden now, increasingly also the concept of consent. Ministries of education often are not able to do that alone. They need, and that's of course part of education, which is a social endeavor, they need the support of other ministries and non-governmental organizations to provide sexuality education. In 85% of countries, different ministries are responsible in partnership or collaboration with the education ministry. Finally, more than 6 in 10 countries cover topics such as gender roles and sexual domestic abuse, gender-based violence. 1 in 2 countries cover mutual consent. We already refer, and I think we focus extensively also in the brochure, the issue of the need for countries to offer pre-service teacher training. Only 1 in 2, or fewer than 1 in 2 actually do. Zambia has set in its education and skills sector plan a target to train all secondary school teachers in that subject, and we'll hear more about that later. And finally, less than 4 in 10 countries have education management information systems that monitor comprehensive sexuality education, especially its implementation. Thailand specifies minimal learning times for health and physical education, and teachers assess students' knowledge through midterm and final examinations. That brings me to an end. I invite you again to consult the brochure that summarizes some of the key findings, and of course, the peer website with its profiles, 50 profiles on the subject. Thank you so much for joining. Back to you, Sophie.
Thank you both very much. It's really great to hear how many countries have made really great progress and moved in the right direction in terms of CSE, and also to learn more about the tools that are available to support countries in their commitments to providing comprehensive sexuality education. So we're going to move on to the second part of the webinar, but before we do that, I want to remind everyone that you can use the Q&A function and pose any questions to any of the speakers and about the topic in general. So please remember to use the Q&A function. And now I'm excited to move to the second part of our event and to present our speakers who will give some practical examples of the way in which the new tools can inform their policymaking and share insights into the progress in teaching sexuality education. So first we have Mr. Joel Komoko, Permanent Secretary for Technical Services at the Ministry of Education of the Republic of Zambia. Next, we have Ms. Maria Celeste Adamoli, Director of Education for Human Rights and Gender and Sexuality at the Ministry of Education of Argentina. We have Martin Jackson Akako, Program Officer of Sexual and Reproductive Health Rights at the Forum for African Women Educationalists, or FAWE. We have Shreya Shrestha, SRHR Program Coordinator at UA, Nepal. And finally, we have Magnus Blom, of Science and Technology teacher in Uppsala, Sweden. So I'm very excited for our speakers. I see them on the screen now. So I'll start with a question for our government representatives. We've heard from Manos and Joanna about bridging the gap between policy and implementation. So what measures have you taken to ensure that CSE policies are translated into tangible actions and programs to reach learners? What are some lessons and challenges you have encountered on your journey? So first, I'll hand it to you, Mr. Joel Komoko from Zambia.
I will invite Dr. Charles Ndakala to present my statement as I am en route and in transit. but that statement does have my full support.
Thank you very much, PS. The PS is logged in, but is in an area where the network is very bad. So instead of cutting, he asked me to read on his behalf. It's an honor and privilege to join this high-level panel on comprehensive sexuality education, organized by the government of Sweden, UNESCO, and the Global Education Monitoring Team. The journey towards comprehensive sexuality education and the discussion could not have come at a better time than now, when we need to share experiences on how we should best provide for our learners and children regarding comprehensive sexuality education. As you are aware, Zambia is one of the most advanced countries in the Eastern and Southern African region in terms of the provision of sexuality education and sexual reproductive health services for the young people. Zambia is also among the countries having a very high HIV prevalence rate in the world. So to address the high prevalence rates, the government has demonstrated political will and put in measures to address this scourge. First and foremost, as you may be aware, Zambia formulated its education policy in 1996, and that is the same policy we are still using even now, though it's under review. At that time, Zambia's policy on education recognized that the development of life skills in the areas of sexual and personal relationships is one way of halting further spread of HIV among school-going children. And initially, it integrated the health education program that includes life skills and sexuality and personal relationships in the school curriculum and syllabus. Later, in 2011, when the Education Act was revised, the Education Act also aimed to promote education on sexuality, reproductive health, HIV and AIDS, and personal relationships in every education institution, and developed a life skills education framework to provide specific guidelines for implementation. Later on, when the 2013 education curriculum was developed, that is the curriculum which we are currently using. The 2013 education curriculum further strengthened the provision of sexuality education with the development of comprehensive sexuality framework for grades 5 to grade 12. So CSE is integrated into the Zambian education curriculum, and it's rolled out countrywide to all the schools. Implementation started in 2014. CSE is integrated in subjects. We have career subjects like social studies, integrated science, biology, civics education, and religious education. And these subjects are part and parcel of the school curriculum from primary to secondary school levels. The syllabus that CSE content is used by the teachers is also used by the Examination Council of Zambia to prepare public and private, as well as grant-aided schools, examinations for these institutions that are public, private, and grant-aided. So the same syllabuses are also used to prepare national examinations taken at grade 7, 9, and 12. So what we are saying is that as long as the career subjects are being taught, then comprehensive sexuality is being taught as well. Then we also have what is called the Education and Skills Development Plan, basically, which is a guide with regards to what we are supposed to implement in the education sector. The Education and Skills Sector Plan ran from 2017 to 2021. It also aimed to enhance comprehensive sexuality education through guidance and counseling, and expanded its integration within the school system. Then besides these other interventions, the government has worked with various partners. One such partner is UNESCO, and through the O3 program, UNESCO has been supporting Zambia and the Ministry of Education in particular in partnership with other CSOs to strengthen the capacity of teachers in delivering CSE lessons and strengthen community engagement activities that basically contribute effectively in the delivery of CSE at school level. So as at 2022, the ministry and the UNESCO had trained over 72,687 teachers in CSE delivery. That translates into these teachers reaching more than 2,089,000 learners from grade 5 to grade 12. The O3 has also been elevated. We have introduced the O3 program at higher and tertiary education institutions. Basically, again, we want these learners to realize their full potential. So we thought it should not only be given to those that are in grade 5 to grade 12. To this effect, our minister endorsed the East and Southern African Ministerial Commitment on 6th December 2021 to fulfill the promise to education, health, and well-being for the adolescents and young people. We as a country are proud to announce the overall score for institutional context in Zambia in the Sexuality Education Review and Assessment, which was at 72% in 2015. Indicating the strong features in place that support sexuality education in the country. Again, even in the UNESCO CSE Scale-Up in Practice report for 2017, ownership by the Ministry of Education partially led to the scale-up of the sexuality education in Zambia, resulting in many numerous achievements where CSE is concerned. You may wish also to know that Zambia is currently undertaking a curriculum reform with the highest commitment given by His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Zambia, Mr. Hakainde Hichilema. With this kind of commitment, as a country, we have no doubt that key issues such as early and unintended pregnancies, HIV/AIDS infections, and sexuality transmitted infections, gender-based violence, child marriages, which result in school dropouts, will be tackled once the curriculum is reformed through a robust, comprehensive sexuality education. With regards to the lessons learned, as a country, we learned that to strengthen ownership of the comprehensive sexuality program, it is important to involve the community at the earliest possible time when the program is being developed. Secondly, it's also important to orient them on what is being done. And it's also important to plan together with the locals, the civic leaders, the traditional leaders, as well as the religious leaders. And then we had one or two challenges in the implementation. One major challenge was inadequate knowledge about the comprehensive sexuality education that came from the traditional leaders and some religious leaders, because they thought that CSE had come to dilute the cultural norms and the national values. But upon orienting them and going them through the national CSE framework, we came to be on the same page, and they have since welcomed the comprehensive sexuality education program. So with regards to where we are in Zambia, I can safely say that comprehensive sexuality education, as it is taught in Zambia, is in tandem with our national values and principles as expounded in the Zambian National Constitution, because a lot of consultations were done when the CSE framework was developed. I submit, Chair.
Thank you very much for your thoughts and for sharing. Those were wonderful reflections. So to go forward, I'm pleased to now hand it over to you, Maria Celeste Adamoli from Argentina. If you could please draw any similarities between your own experience of designing and implementing CSE in schools with what we've just heard.
Muchas gracias, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Sophie. I'm very grateful for the invitation to participate in this. Grateful to UNESCO and the Swedish government and also the GEM report. We're very pleased to be able to participate in this, representing our Minister Jaime Persic of the Ministry of Education, who unfortunately wasn't able to connect. Now, let me just address the question before us. Let me begin by saying that in our country, our Ministry of Education takes as its starting point, or as a basic premise, that comprehensive sexual education is a fundamental human right. And it's on that basis that I would like to share with you some of my thoughts on how we've developed our policies in Argentina so that CSE can be included in this overall program. Let me just begin by saying that Argentina, as Manos was just saying, has a national law on comprehensive sexual education that was adopted in 2006. Now, this is key to understanding how implementation would be rolled out, right? Everything is governed by this law, and that is what has informed the development of CSE policies in our country. Now, here I would like to refer to two specific features of our legal framework when it comes to CSE. Firstly, CSE is something that is comprehensive first and foremost, for sure. And starting with the law, we also conceive of CSE as a right. The first article of our law on CSE says that all learners have the right to receive sexual education through the transmission of relevant, accurate, reliable, and updated information on the various aspects that are involved in comprehensive sexual education. Now, beyond that, I would like to tell you about some of the concrete experiences that we had in rolling out these policies in Argentina. And it's important to bear in mind here that our law on CSE established the creation of a national curriculum for this. And this is something that was put together under the Ministry of Education's authority. A special unit was set up, and that's the department that I head. We work with other programs that are related to training in citizenship and the protection of human rights and propagation of human rights knowledge in schools. So all of this is done with the various 24 provinces in our federal state. Our education in Argentina is decentralized in these 24 different provinces, and it's very important, therefore, for the regional or provincial authorities to tie in with the national program so that we have a uniform approach across the 64,000 schools we have in our country. We've established some guidelines that have to do with the various legal and jurisdictional matters pertaining to the provincial authorities versus the national authorities. And this includes the content of the curriculum, monitoring. We even have some cross-sectoral approaches with the Ministry of Health, focusing on preventing unwanted pregnancies, et cetera, et cetera. So this law has been around for a little over 16 years, and what I can say is that in the last few years, we've actually expanded all of our legal arsenal for CSE and to support CSE and roll out CSE. These are what we call the laws that came after, right? Laws that have to do with gender equality, gender violence, abortion, etc. This is a much more fleshed out legal framework that we have at our disposal that really is updated, is in keeping with contemporary times. And we refer to all of this as the construction of new democratic citizens in schools. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. And then turning to the second question that Sophie mentioned, what lessons and challenges have we encountered as we were trying to develop comprehensive sexual education? Well, I would say that we have to think about policies in their proper context and be mindful of the challenges that we face. Now, we in Argentina had to face the challenge of coming up with a CSE policy that was really seen as a national government policy. And that's why it's very important for the Ministry of Education to be spearheading all of this, starting with the law that gives a framework for policies that afterwards would be developed and take us through changing times, changing management approaches, etc. We've also seen a large number of social and political and cultural changes since the last over the last 16 years, and this is something that's very important. Everything has to be kept up to date. Now, this is a public policy for CSE. It is something that is certainly geared towards creating more inclusive and equitable societies, focusing on things such as human rights-based conceptions of gender, marriage, violence, etc. So there were lots of challenges, of course, even during the preliminary debate before we adopted the law on sexual education in our country. There were other positions when it comes to the very concept of sexual education. There were those who felt that basically health and reproductive health was the only thing that we should focus on. But when we start talking about things in a comprehensive sense, we have to introduce other concepts, especially when we think about the recommendations of WHO when it comes to education and sexuality. And the WHO recommends a comprehensive approach to this. And so we started developing other conceptual and pedagogical tools that would make it possible for us to have this comprehensive approach in schools. We came up with a series of thematic areas where we want to work. First of all, taking care of one's body and health, and gender equity, respect diversity, and uphold people's rights. Now, each one of these larger areas contain a variety of other areas of dialogue within our society that are constantly evolving, right? CSE is not something that is immune to inner conflict or debate, right? There are disagreements, and so to a certain extent we can say that CSE is dealing with challenges day in, day out. There's resistance out there from institutions, from different communities, etc. And this also gives rise to new challenges on the teaching front. So what we've been doing in Argentina is trying to bring down the gaps in implementation from some parts of the country to another. We're doing this by investing in updating educational tools, teacher training, to make sure that everything can be brought forward on an equal footing, so that we really do have a comprehensive approach to sexual education that is comprehensive throughout the country as well. Now, of course, one thing that you have to bear in mind is that when it comes to CSE, it's the same thing that applies to any educational policy. You need money for this. You need a budget for this. And that's what we've been doing. I would also like to welcome the fact that we've had an approach that's always been based on public consultations, working with different sectors, CSOs, community organizations, etc. And this is something that's part of our overarching objective, was to have better and more public policies based on human rights that will make it possible for us to have inclusive, equal societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Those were really wonderful and insightful thoughts, and I really appreciated them. So on to our next speaker. But before we move on, I do want to remind all of the speakers to please keep your comments to 4 minutes so we can get to some of the exciting questions that are sent in by the audience. My next question is for Martin. How is FAWE supporting a new conversation on CSE across Africa?
Thank you, Sophie. Thanks everyone for joining in. My name is Martin Ohako. I work for FAWE, which is a forum for African women educationalists based in Nairobi, Kenya. So basically, FAWE is an educational organization that handles the issues around gender equality and equity among girls and women. We also advocate for education. So maybe now straight to the discussion of the day. I'll just try to look at what FAWE is doing at the national level. Then I'll try to link it also at the international level. FAWE has basically had a long working relationship with UNESCO, especially since we are both focused with really trying to improve the education outcomes for girls and women, and basically even for the boys. So at the national level, what FAWE is doing is that we are implementing programs in 33 countries across Africa. And within our structure, the way we work is that we really try to have a very strong relationship with the relevant stakeholders, mostly the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Health. So when you're talking about comprehensive sexuality education, you really can dissociate yourself from the two ministries. They are very, very crucial and very vital. We also have a lot of good working relationship with other ministries, which could be from the Ministry of Gender and Youth, but basically from the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Health majorly. And I will also look at what are some of the demonstrative, what we call FAWE demonstrative models, which FAWE is trying to roll out across the specific countries to really advocate for issues to do with comprehensive sexuality education. So from the presentation that we did get from Joanna, the PowerPoint presentation that we had, we also talked about some of the effective ways of really implementing comprehensive sexuality education. And when you look at the first one, is really under the laws and policies. So FAWE, we do our work around influencing of laws and policies at the national level and at the international level. So when you look at things like re-entry policies, where we are trying to look at what is the end game for the girls who end up getting pregnant. Different countries have different policies. I know Tanzania has been on the spot in the recent past for really banning re-entry policies for girls, but I think there was some court and some decisions were made, and I think they have actually lifted that up. So FAWE is actually part of the organizations that really try to come up with progressive policies that try to drum support for some of these things that are actually happening in our schools. So also when you look at our models, like for instance, we have one that is called Tuseme. So Tuseme is one of the curriculums that FAWE used to try to improve the learning outcomes for students in school. Tuseme is a Swahili word for speak up, and basically it's more of about youth empowerment and encouraging youth to speak out on issues that affect their life, which actually even touch on issues to do with SRHR. So Tuseme has actually been rolled out in almost 10 countries now across where FAWE works. And it's a model that tries to sensitize the learners in school. When you go to any typical school, when a teacher actually asks a question, in most cases, it will be a boy who will raise up their hand. So the girls are in a space where they're not really empowered to really know that. It's also in their space to really participate actively. And we are trying to look at how we can just come to those spaces where we try to also make them come out and actually speak up. So the other model I'll talk about is what we call gender responsive pedagogy. So this one is train teachers to use gender responsive methods in terms of how they are really teaching. So in terms of education, the needs of the girls and the needs of the boys in a typical class cannot be the same. They actually affect the learning outcomes. And also when you're talking about comprehensive sexuality education, girls have more needs in terms of sexual reproductive health compared to boys. So in the gender responsive pedagogy, here we are trying to sensitize the teachers in terms of how are they handling the curriculums in school? How are they delivering the contents? How are they really trying to make sure that these particular girls, the particular boys, the different group of students that they're handling in class, all their different needs are actually met. When you look at the girls' issues to do with sanitary hygiene, menstrual hygiene, and talking about sanitary pads, we've had countries where some of these girls really don't manage to go to schools when they are around that period of menstruation. So in the GRP, we are really trying to sensitize the teachers to be even very sensitive in terms of when they are really teaching, in terms of how they're making sure that the needs of the different students are actually taken care of. Then we have centers of excellence. So centers of excellence, we really try to convert normal schools to gender responsive schools. We try to work with teachers, the head teachers, we try to work with the specific stakeholders like the community and all, where we're just trying to look at when it comes to matters to do with comprehensive sexuality education or rather sexuality education in schools. What are some of the things that the schools can do?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. If you could please wrap up so we can get to the Q&A, and I'd love to hear more about it too in the Q&A. But if you could wrap up as quickly as possible, please.
Yeah, so that was the last one in terms of the national level, but at the international, the regional level, I will talk about again the policies. FAWE is basically in the area of influencing laws and policies. And for us here, we are looking at things like ESA ministerial commitments. So FAWE is one of the organizations that is on the forefront of really trying to front for governments to sign up to some of these things like the ESA commitments. I'm glad we've had a speaker from Zambia, and I think in Africa, only few countries have actually committed to implementing it. Zambia, I think, is here because it's one of the countries in Africa that is doing so well in terms of comprehensive sexuality education. So at that particular level, FAWE is also really trying to influence that space where we are trying to say that in terms of policy and influence, in terms of comprehensive sexuality education, what are some of the things that we can do at that particular level so that we can really advocate for them in these spaces? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. So next, I'm very happy to introduce our youth representative, Shreya Shrestha, SRHR Program Coordinator at UA Nepal. If you could please reflect upon why in so many countries there's still a gap between political will and commitments vis-a-vis implementation of CSE programs and initiatives, and how might young people be able to use the findings presented by Manos and Joanna to hold governments to account?
Thank you so much, Sophie, for that question. As we all know, comprehensive sexuality education is often looked and judged upon from the angle of social norms and morals and traditions, rather than looking at it from an educational skill-building point of view, which is context relevant and specific. Shrouded in this shame and secrecy, the stigma and taboos around the topics of CSE makes it difficult to initiate and engage in conversations around them. Schools and parents, two major sources of information for young people while growing up, tend to avoid or shy away from these discussions in the fear that more the information given, more likely that young people will experiment and engage in sexual behavior in the absence of any evidence or studies to support the latter claim. The need for CSE is not isolated to any specific country, region, or age group. Children and young people all around the globe are vulnerable to sexual and gender-based violence, misinformation about sex, gender roles, relationships, sexuality, and much more. These limitations or restrictions takes away young people's agencies, compromising their chance at living up to their fullest potential. Be it information on their changing bodies, sex, their sexual and reproductive rights, young people do not have access to accurate and reliable information and services, which would enable informed decision-making. CSE hence is a key to create avenues for resources and discussion spaces on sexuality and related issues. As a key way forward, young people in all their diversity should be included in the process of developing and updating a CSE curriculum regularly to ensure it responds to their specific needs. We need to scale up all types of CSE that are engaging for young people, curated from a human-centered approach with youth-friendly teaching and learning methodologies, including on digital channels, but at the same time not forgetting the value of non-digital learning. To promote CSE, we must be strategic in our approach. We must tailor our interventions and advocacy to actors who are open to CSE but not yet committed. We need to focus on our allies and build our networks to create a demand for CSE from the ground up. UA has been working in the sector for over a decade with many interventions which aim at creating and capacitating young people as change makers and leaders in the sector of youth SRHR, at the same time holding government agencies accountable for it. As a part of our effort, UA developed an M&E framework for the national CSE program based on UNESCO's Sexuality Education and Review Assessment Tool, and we were the first organization in Nepal to conduct an assessment of the national CSE program beyond the analysis of the curriculum. UA is also focusing on the digitalization of CSE as an effort to sustainability by creating a free e-learning course, which are context-specific, fun, and innovative, while making sure that it is accessible to young people with disabilities with features such as sign language interpretations, text-to-speech plugins, subtitles, language options, etc. We are also focusing on creating the first of its kind in Nepal, a website slowly dedicated to answer young people's most innate and nuanced topics on CSE and SRHR with an aim of promoting open, honest, and judgment-free information. We also regularly organize peer education classes to schools and teach the contents that our national curriculum does not cover. We have a special MOU with the Ministry of Education to help them develop more teaching learning materials in CSE. We're also facilitating the Ministry of Health and Education in the development of an implementation guideline of the National Adolescent and Health Strategy with a primary focus on in-school CSE. We believe that CSE is a vehicle for social change. It has the power to foster a new generation of young people who believe in bodily autonomy, healthy relationships, affirming each other's identities, and building a stronger community of connection and respect. In a time as uncertain and challenging as this, it is crucial that we focus on naming and sharing the society shifting power of sexuality education. Thank you so much. Back to you, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Shreya. I'm sure that with your passion and determination and movement of young people, real change can be achieved. So thank you so much for that. Now to pass it to our fourth and final speaker on the issue of teacher training and preparation, Magnus Blom from Uppsala in Sweden. Magnus, you've just heard from Joanna that while efforts to improve teacher training are evident in some countries, teachers say that they lack confidence to deliver sexuality education. Can you please talk us through your experience and what international and local resources have you used in your classroom?
Thank you very much. I can, as a teacher, I can really understand this feeling of a lack of confidence because the challenge or the task of a teacher is to deliver the sexuality education. And I believe that to answer your question, it's a two-part challenge, a two-part problem. The first thing that you think of as a teacher is, okay, I have this curriculum here and I need to plan, I need to process, I need to break down this content, this subject matter into lessons that can be performed. So that's the one part. And then the other part is, how do I perform these lessons as efficiently as possible to include my students and make them active? So I would like to start with the second part, because something that you need to consider as well, that this lack of confidence is not only in teachers. I think you need to remember that the students are also very unfamiliar with the subjects, and they can also experience reluctance to participate actively because they're not used to the subject matter. They feel hesitant, or even they want to avoid this. So I work at a school in Uppsala, Gränbyskolan, and it's a school that has a large ethnic divergence. We have students with many different backgrounds. They have different cultural and they have different values from their homes. So in order to make a successful teaching environment for them, you need to get everyone involved, even those students that are reluctant. And from my experience, the most successful way to do this is to start with something familiar, like start with a concept discussing what's the term normal implies. That's something that every student, regardless of their background, has some kind of personal idea about. And when you get that discussion going, these reluctant students, they usually start to loosen up a bit, and then this is sort of the way in to start getting like a successful learning climate. Because I believe that when you teach sexuality education, it's not a process where you stand up there in front of the students and lecture to them. You need to get them involved, because as we heard previously, it's not just about learning something, it's about acquiring the right values and the right tools to be able to live a healthy life in the future. So you need all the students to participate actively. So that's why it's really important to get all the both boys and girls, and the reluctant ones and the more talkative ones. Everyone needs to be involved. So that's one part. And the other part, the part that perhaps is the first hurdle, is when you're at the planning stage. So the prospect of starting or making successful lesson plans, you need to break down the subject matter, and it's very multifaceted. It includes many different viewpoints. It's like a natural science view when you talk about sexual health and puberty and so on, but there's also many other social science angles that you need to consider. So when you stand in front of as a teacher in Sweden, I have the Swedish curriculum that has it's mandatory. It's included all of these different facets. So when I plan all my lessons, I use the curriculum as my guideline. But for those teachers out there who are not exposed to the Swedish curriculum, you have the UN technical guidance on CSE, the manual. And I've looked through this manual, and it's really a accessible document because it breaks down this big multifaceted subject into more tangible and handleable parts, like key concepts. And it also gives you a suggestion on a progression, which is also good, because then you know where to start and what's the appropriate thing to go through with the different age groups. So, I mean, I teach students between 12 and 15 years of age, and this guide. This guide document really, it corresponds quite well to what I have planned according to the Swedish curriculum. So I would say that a solution for this breaking down of the subject matter is really found in this guide document. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Magnus. So now, because we have a short period of time left, I do want to move on very quickly to a Q&A. I have one question for all of the speakers, and if you could please keep your answers to really just one sentence, 1 minute maximum. What is one key message from today's discussion that you want to get across to policymakers listening in today to shift the needle on CSE in your country? And let's go backwards, and we can start with Magnus and then go backwards through the speakers.
Can you repeat
Magnus,
the question, please? Yeah, can you repeat the question, please?
What is one key message from today that you would want to get across to policymakers in your country?
In my country specifically, I think that we need to consider. We need to remember that our country is really a diverse country, and we have really different constitutions of classes. There are many different students. So in order to be successful, you cannot have one single sort of solution to face this, because you have to have different approaches in different classrooms. Thank you.
Great. And Shreya, over to you.
So one key call to action that I would like to present to my country is to request them to revoke their decision in making the subject health population in education, which consists most of the CSE contents in Nepal. They made it optional for grade 9 and 10. And this is my call to action to revoke that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreya. And Martin, over to you now.
Yeah, I think for me, to the policy makers, I will say they need to be guided by data, and at least let us have implementation that has backing of data, because there's all the evidence out there to show that CS is something that needs to be done like yesterday. And also in terms of opposition, I know some of them within the specific policymakers, we have them. So also it's a matter of really trying to say what kind of policymakers are we also working with. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin. Maria, over to you on the question of policy in your country.
Gracias, Sophie. Quisiera...
Thank you, Sophie. Just very quickly, I would like to say that the law itself is very important. It's the linchpin of everything. But it's not enough. And so what's really important is to make sure that you can bring together the political will on the one hand with all of the work that is done by teachers themselves in the classroom. And it's important to have a whole array of initiatives for that to happen. So you have a policy, sure, but you also need teacher training, et cetera, to make sure that there's something that can be institutionalized, something that doesn't depend on just personal whim. And also, I would like to underscore the importance of the comprehensive nature of sexual education and putting it in squarely within the framework of human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Now, I would like to invite Charles Nkala to speak for Mr. Joel Komoko on the issue.
Thank you very much. In Zambia, we have learned that stakeholder engagement and consultation is very key for comprehensive sexuality education, especially with regards to sustainability. Otherwise, without it, it becomes difficult.
Thank you very much. And finally, over to Manos and Joanna, if you would like to answer the question as well, please.
Sure, of course. I think the main points that we have also tried before is that it's not enough to just have sometimes laws and policies. We really need to monitor the implementation, not least because there are a lot of variations in understanding. And I think by monitoring the implementation of these policies, we can also make sure that everyone is on message and that there are no departures from what is the official policy and intention. And also in that way, we can also ensure that concerns of several communities can be tempered by convincing them that the policy implementation is on the right track.
The speakers have really raised so many good concluding points, and I would agree with all of them, whether it's around teachers, around laws, around dialogue at community level. So I think the one thought I would take from these discussions is the importance of the confidence that's needed by a decision maker or by a teacher to be able to say, I know I'm doing the right thing by teaching sexuality education in the classroom. This is going to be good for the young people in front of me in my classroom, or it's going to be good for the young people in my country, and to have the courage of those convictions to know the decision is a good one. And of course, there's all the training and the laws and the data and the curriculum work that needs to be done, but it has to be accompanied by this sense of confidence and conviction, which I hope with the evidence and the data and the conversations and these kinds of platforms and discussions, countries and those representatives are increasingly able to feel that sense of confidence. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Manos and Joanna. And thank you to all. It's been a really powerful discussion and conversation. Thank you to all of the speakers. As was clear from today's discussion, the peer country profiles on CSE and the findings from the Global Status Report offer really clear guidance for countries to implement CSE programs as well as peer learning. During our discussion, we've touched upon how resistance from small but influential opponents has actually stymied efforts to implement CSE in schools in some countries, pointing to the need for increased advocacy to counter misinformation. So I encourage all of those listening to embrace the facts and support countries to forge ahead with their push to deliver meaningful CSE. And finally, we will share a video, which is from a few years ago, so it's a little bit older, but it remains really powerful in its message and really important. So thank you all.
The first thing I can remember was at junior school. I must have been about 9 or 10, and they showed us on those old-fashioned, you know, the big TV screens they had. And we all sat there and watched a woman having a baby. And I was completely traumatised, and it was just a complete bloodbath and a mess. And I just walked out and they go, and I went home so confused.
When I reached my puberty age, I couldn't tell my mother because there is no that kind of relationship. I rather told my teacher.
อย่างที่อ้อยบอกว่ารุ่นอ้อยเนี่ยไม่ใช่อ้อยคนเดียวหรอกเพื่อนๆที่อยู่ในวัยเดียวกันเนี่ยเรามองดูเรื่องเพศศึกษาเป็นแบบมันเป็นเรื่องที่แบบอยู่ลึกๆไม่ควรจะเอามาคุยกันข้างนอกอย่างเงี้ยค่ะไม่ควรเอามาคุย
Que mi primera menstruación fue tan yo no estaba preparada para nada, o sea mi mamá no me había contado de nada, entonces de alguna manera la educación sexual tuvo que venir rápidamente y en esos tiempos claro no se hablaba mucho.
La educación sexual se abren muchas más posibilidades de poder relacionarse con las personas. Y yo creo que para mí tiene un valor importante el concepto porque también es importante de alguna manera valorarse como ser humano.
I just think it needs to be inclusive, honest, and fun.
ก็น่าจะช่วยแก้ปัญหาเรื่องพวกเรื่องที่มันมีปัญหาตอนนี้ก็น่าจะเป็นแบบพวกท้องก่อนวัยอันควรอะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะเพราะว่าถ้าเราศึกษามาเราก็จะได้รู้ว่าต่อไปเราควรทำอะไรเราควรป้องกันยังไงอะไรคือสิ่งที่เราควรทำไม่ควรทำค่ะ
I can decide for myself when I want to have children. I can decide for myself when to get married, what love is for me, and all of those things. So really, for me, it's freedom.
Some parents feel shy talking about it with their children in the home. So if a child goes to school and he or she is educated on sex and all that, it's very good. You know, it helps them know their morals, how they should be respected, what to do.
ตอนนี้มันไม่ใช่เรื่องน่าอายแล้วเราก็ควรจะศึกษาไว้อะไรอย่างเงี้ยค่ะเพราะว่าเราก็ต้องอยู่ด้วยกันในสังคมนี้ก็น่าจะศึกษาไว้
and there's positive aspects of it like intimacy, forming a strong relationship with your partner and love essentially. I feel like it's important that everyone gets taught the positives as well as the negatives and risks of it.
Yo creo que en la medida en que la sexualidad se educa como algo natural, va a hacer que las personas nos vinculemos de otra manera y por lo tanto podamos, por un lado, aumentar las relaciones afectuosas y por lo tanto el respeto hacia las personas.
Comprehensive sexuality education, when given to any group of people, any person, it gives you a foundation for a successful life.
So that concludes the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Goodbye.